Good morning, everyone. Great to see everyone. Our Haftarah this morning, we have the privilege of studying the Haftarah for Parashat Behar. As I just joked, this is the year of special Haftarot, of unique Haftarot. We don't even read the double Parsha, so therefore we get to read all the Haftarah which we typically skip. So one of those examples is this Haftarah. This Haftarah is from Yirmiyahu, from Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 6 through 27. There's always the exception that proves the rule. So this Haftarah is a little bit that, although we will discuss a debate between Maimonides and some other commentaries on this. So we'll come back to that. That's a disclaimer for this. But in general, we talk about Haftarot and we say, well, if it's from Nevi'im Achronim, from the later prophets, from Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, from Isaiah, from Ezekiel, from Jeremiah, that what we would expect is not story and narrative, but prophetic prose. And if it's Yoshua, Joshua, Judges, Shmuel, Kings, all those different ones, then we don't expect prophetic prose. We expect narrative, story, the development of whatever situation, current events that are happening there. This Haftarah is a little bit different. This Haftarah, we actually get, there's interactions. There's, what's the expression? There's audience interaction, as we see. Yirmiyahu, just to set the stage, Yirmiyahu is currently, this is chapter 32. Yirmiyahu has worked hard to spread the word, the counter-cultural message that the Jewish people should submit to Bavel and not resist. That if they do tshuva, that redemption will come quick, and that there'll be a 70-year exile. Right? That's sort of what Yirmiyahu's message is. It changes at different points in his career, but that's the general message. And the king is very upset with him. People are very upset with him. There are false prophets that conspire to say that Yirmiyahu is giving the wrong message. They say, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem. The temple of God can never be destroyed by anyone else. If you really believe in the all-power, omniscient, omnipotent God, so how can anyone sack God's temple? Except if God decides, right? That's the part these false prophets are missing. But the logic is certainly there. And Yirmiyahu gets thrown into jail. He is thrown into jail, and we'll see a little bit the type of conditions he has as being a rabble-rouser. And we get all of this is where we pick up our story. We're in chapter 32. This is the good part of Yirmiyahu. What I mean by the good part of Yirmiyahu is this is chapter 31 through 35 are the parts of Yirmiyahu that really are upbeat, that describe what life will be like in redemption. Apparently, I don't remember who quoted it, but there's the idea that Rashi's favorite chapter is chapter 31 of Yirmiyahu, is his favorite chapter in Tanakh. And there are a number of Haftarot that get pulled from this small part for that. In particular, our Haftarah is a narrative. Vayomer Yirmiyahu Hayad Dvar Hashem Elai Lemor. Yirmiyahu says the following words was the prophecy that God told him to do. Hine, behold, your cousin, Hanamel, is going to come, and Ubai Lacha Lemor is going to come, Kenelach et Sadi Asher Ba'anatot. Go, I want you to purchase my land that's in Anatot, Kilacha Mishpat Hageula Liknot. Because you're next in line to redeem that land in purchase. This obviously is a big connection to our Parsha. Part of Behar talks about not just Shemitah and Yovel, but the laws of Geula, of redemption, of not redemption like redemption from the Almighty, but we're talking about redemption, we're referring to redeeming lands. If, let's say, the Bernstein clan owned ancestral land, and for some reason, they couldn't purchase, it got sold, they couldn't redeem it, so it would fall to other members of the family to redeem, to make sure that property stays within the Bernstein clan, right? That is this idea of Geulah. If you remember, it is the case with Ruth, right? Boaz, that there's the land of Naomi's husbands and son that need to be redeemed, and that should stay within the family. Boaz cleverly ties it to marrying Ruth. That's a little bit more complicated, but that whole idea of not just redemption, but redeeming the land of your friends, of your fellow, of your relative, is ensconced in our parsha, and therefore the connection is very clear as well. So he tells them that you have the opportunity to do geula, to do redemption, to redeem the land. Therefore, you should buy the land in Anatot. Anatot is an area that is, let's say, north of Jerusalem. There used to be an airport there. It is, the ancient Anatot is around Pitgat Ze'ev area. It is referenced a dozen or so times in Tanakh. It's initially given to the descendants of Aaron. It's a Kohanic settlement. And it's pointed to the Arim of the Kohanim in Tanakh. It's referenced at different places. It's connected to Shiloh. There are a bunch of places where Anatot is referenced in Tanakh. But that's where this field is that needs to be redeemed by Yirmiyahu. So much so, we know that Yirmiyahu's connection to Anatot. How do we know? How do we know that Yirmiyahu was from Anatot? Anyone? Not a trick question. The Navi tells us the very first verse of Yirmiyahu. Divrei Yirmiyahu, these are the words, the teachings, the Nevi'im, the prophecies of Yirmiyahu. Ben Hilkiyahu, the son of Hilkiyahu. Min HaKohanim, he's one of the priests. Yirmiyahu was a Kohen. Asher ba'Anatot, Be'eretz Binyamin, from the city of Anatot in Binyamin. So it makes sense, by the way, how this is playing out. His relative, his cousin, has a tract of land next to his tracts of land. And that tract of land got sold to, who knows, the Rosenblatt clan. And now it needs to be redeemed. And his cousin can't afford it. So it falls to Yirmiyahu to buy it and keep it within the family, to keep it for his kid. So God tells him to go, that they're going to come. And they're going to ask you to buy the land. Now, what's the land worth in Israel at this time? Pretty much nothing, right? What do you think the land was worth, to Noah right before the flood? Like nothing, right? Yirmiyahu has been telling everyone, you're going to go into exile. The nation is going to be sacked. The temple is going to be destroyed, going to exile. But what does God tell him? You should buy the land for Eta Kesef, for the money, Ve'echto b'sefer, and you should seal it. You should sign it, the echtom, and sign it, the aid edim, and you should have it witnessed. This is a really fascinating, it's just a contemporaneous demonstration of how Jewish legal practices worked, or potentially how Jewish legal practices work. Right? You signed a contract. You wrote a contract. You signed it. You had witnesses. And then you should measure out the silver you have to pay for it. Right? This is classical 101. All they're missing is bracha v'atzlacha. And continues verse 11. And take this purchase deed, this scroll of purchase, right? It's not that they wrote a special Sefer Torah. That's just how they wrote everything. Those were the scrolls. V'hechatum, v'hamitzvah, v'hachukim, and the sealed text and everything. This is an interesting verse we'll come back to. V'eten et ha-sefer ha-mikna, and take the deed, Al Baruch ben Neriah, your scribe, before the eyes of all of you, Leinei Edim, before everyone, V'Hachtuvim B'Sefer HaMikneh Leinei Kol Yudim HaYoshvim B'Chatzar HaMatara. All the people were sitting in the courtyard of the prison. Right? Realize Yirmiyahu was in prison for all this, right? What type of prison is he in? If he's able to do this, he has his brother, his cousins come visit him. He has access to witnesses and scribes and to purchase things and measure out silver. Right? He's not in Sing Sing or Alcatraz. Right? He's in a political prison. Right? He's a political prisoner. He is he's a very important political prisoner. He's in a high scale prison. The point isn't to throw him in a hole and punish him. It's to keep him from being a subversive prophet among the people of Israel. That's why it's Baruch le'nehem. Tell Baruch before them. Kol amar Hashem. So says Hashem. Elokei Yisrael, the God of Israel. Lakoach et hasrim ha'ela et hasefer ha'mikneh zeh, and all the different documents that accompany this. And put them b'kli cheres in an earthenware pot, leman yamdu yamim rabim, and bury them in a earthenware pot for many days. Ki ko amar Hashem, for so says God. Od ye kanu batim v'sadot kramim ba'aretz hazot. Exile, destruction is coming. But don't worry, you will come back. You will still be able to purchase houses and fields and vineyards in this land. And this is a symbol of that, meaning Yirmiyahu has been the prophet of destruction. And here he's telling the people, but don't give up hope. There'll be a time, it'll take some time, take this deed and bury it, put it in earthenware and to keep it safe. But it's not that it's forever, it's just a period of time until we come back. By the way, how long can a scroll keep in an earthenware pot when it's sort of buried and protected from the elements?
Probably like the Dead Sea Scrolls,
A really, 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 really long time, like the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah. So were these earthenware pots buried on some particular piece of property, the property he owned, or was there a central registry of deeds, I guess, where?
So I think, Chuck, what you mean to ask also, is there a billion-dollar archaeological find still to be found to find these earthenware, this Yirmiyahu's signature, and to bring them to market, to have this generational 2,000-year-old find me geocache to catch in? The answer is we don't know the answer to that. If we did, or there are people who might claim, but there would be a lot of treasure hunters looking for that. This would be like the find of history. If you found Yirmiyahu's purchase document for Anatot, just thinking about that, right? We could. It's a national treasure movie that would go to waste behind something like this. But we don't know. It seems
this is like Indiana Jones and the Lost Deed.
Oh, for sure. Like Indiana Jones, MI6, and bring in the Mossad, like this would be unbelievable. But this leads to an important question which we have to ask ourselves, which I alluded to at the beginning, is did this happen, right? Did this happen? Now, I'm not questioning whether Tanakh happened. The question is, how do we understand these things that come up? There's a big debate about this. The Rambam, Maimonides, very famously in Mor Nevuchim, wrote that many of the visions that our Nevi'im had, they are just that. They are visions, right? Hosea doesn't really marry a harlot and have children that are lo ami and this and that, right? That's a vision. Yecheskel doesn't really travel to Nahar far. That's a vision. Abraham didn't really Abraham didn't really welcome 3 angels. That was a vision. All of those things are visions according to the Rambam. Even this, potentially according to the Rambam, I think the Rambam says it. I was just looking this up before. The Rambam writes in Mor Nevuchim, this is the guide to the perplexed. Chelek Gimel, I'm sorry, Chelek, one second, where is this? Chelek Beis, second section, Perik Memvav, chapter 46. So he writes, Mm. Kol elu hanimshalim b'mare hanavua v'lo yatsa Yirmiyahu michutz l'Eretz Yisrael l'Bavel. Yirmiyahu didn't really travel outside of Eretz Yisrael. V'lo ra'a parat, and didn't see the Nahar Parat. V'lo amru lo Hoshea kach lecha eshet v'kach amru lo Hoshea kach lecha eshet zunim. Take this prostitute. Inyan hahu kula ledas haban kulum kulam miledas habanim laploni hakol b'mare hanavua. All of this is a prophecy. It's a dream. Ki achar v'rotam lo nishar inyan misafik v'yod. It's just not the case. Meaning it wasn't. It didn't really happen. That is the Rambam. On the other hand, you have the Abarbanel and others who suggest no. Rov sipore hanviim kihem simanim va'otot ha'elu haya minach hanviim lasot tamid b'foal yitei shiru b'nei adam v'yit halu mehem. Meaning the prophets did do this. They did it for dramatic effect. They did it to convey their message. They did it because God told them to. All of these different pieces were part of this very unique line of, for lack of a better term, showbiz that the prophets were in to sort of get dramatic effect. And this probably worked very well. Imagine the collected scene around Yirmiyahu as he's buying what he has declared his whole life to be worthless property because they are going into exile. And his message is, don't worry, you will come back one day. It's a very powerful image. Made only more powerful by actually doing it, as opposed to saying, I had a vision where God had me do this in the vision, right? So it seems to be a bit of debate. That would answer your question, Chuck. Does this exist or not? But let's assume it does. Let's assume it does. Let's just come back to our Haftorah. Va'et palel el Hashem acharei titi et sefer ha-mikna el baruch ben Neriah lemor, and I daven to God after this happened, saying, Aha, O God, O sovereign, Hashem Elokim hine ata asita et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, you made the heavens and the earth, Bocha gadol v'zroacha hanituya, and with your outstretched arm, there's nothing you can't do, God. O sechesa lafim, you do kindness for thousands of generations. Mshel avon avot al chek b'neihem achreihem ha'el hagibor Hashem tzvakot shemo gadol ha'etza, wondrous in deed and purpose, v'rav ha'ali v'rav ha'alilaya, and is even more unbelievable in deed, in great deed, in capacity, beyond anything people could do. You displayed wonderful, verse 20, with great otot umoftim, with great signs and marvels and miracles, until this very day. V'Yisrael ba'adam ba'taslacha Hashem kayomazeh, made such a renowned name for yourself, and you brought us to the land of Israel, Eretz v'chalav v'dvash. You've done wonderful things for the Jewish people. Verse 23, V'lo shamu b'chalecha, but the people haven't listened to you, and they didn't follow your Torot. Et kol asher tzivata lahem, everything you commanded them, lasot, v'lo asu, they didn't do. But tikra otam et kol hara azot, and therefore that's what's caused all of this evil that will befall them. Hine, behold, there's a siege that's coming to this land, and you're going to give the land biyad hakash, in the hands of the enemy to conquer it. B'vnei acherev v'harav v'hadever asher dibarta haya v'hinecha ro'eh. Everything you threatened that would happen is about to happen. Bata amarta elai, and you said to me, kinelecha tasadeh b'kesef, give the buy this land and have witnesses and do this whole process. But you're about to you're about to hand over the land to the enemy, to the conquerors, to the Babylonians. Ends of our Haftarah, Vayhi Hashem, Dvar Hashem El Yirmiyahu Lemor. Yirmiyahu is basically saying, God, like, what? Have mercy on us. How could this be that you're making us do all of these things? And I'm sorry that all these things you've forecasted are going to happen, and they are happening, and yet we're building this land. Dvar Hashem El Yirmiyahu Lemor. The word of God was to Yirmiyahu saying, Ani Hashem Elohei Kol Basar. I'm the Lord of all flesh, not just the Jewish people. Is there anything wondrous? Is there any miracle that I cannot do? Question mark. What's God's answer to Yirmiyahu's petition here? What's the answer? Oh God, you've done wonderful things, and we deserve everything that's coming to us. And we're going to do all these things. But now you're telling me to buy land? You're telling me to buy land, even though the city is about to be given into the hands of the conquerors? And God's response is, verse 27, Hinei ani Hashem, behold, I'm the Lord. I can do everything. I can do anything. Is there anything hard for me to do? What do we assume that means?
That it'll be okay.
Right, it'll be okay, right? That's the message that Torah wants to leave us in, right? God tells Yirmiyahu, Yeshuat Hashem keheref ayin. God can save the people in an instant, right? Nothing is beyond God's capacity. The capacity for redemption, for things to work out, is there. God, that's predicated on God's total power, right? And that's the beauty of the Haftarah. So Haftarah stops our reading right there, and that's the message it leads us. But the chapter doesn't end there. The chapter continues, and that's that. We've talked about this before. Chuck, I'm just going to finish the sentence, and we'll come to you. The Haftarah freeze frames for us sometimes the story, and the message Haftarah gives us is different than the actual words, what they mean. Chuck, what were you going to say?
Okay, two things. I mean, they could have finished off by God saying just betach. I mean, but normally I use Chabad, Haftarah, and apparently Chabad's Haftarah ended with Pasuk 22. And then it didn't go beyond. So it's basically just scrambling now to switch to Svarya to pick up the rest of it. But that's kind of interesting because 22 is sort of ending on a high note. And then things start going downhill in 23. So any explanation on why there's a difference?
23 definitely goes down, but 27 seems to go up again.
No. But 22 is all up until 22. It's all good. And then you have this going down.
It's all good. So I actually think it's very intentional. I'm surprised Chabad stops there. So I think it's very intentional to go to 27, which we'll get to in a second. First of all, what you're saying is right, but there's two different pieces. One is positive history, and one is positive message for the present. Mm-hmm. Meaning up to 22 is just things were good in the past. The Jews know that, right? But that doesn't mean it's going to be good right now. 27 is good in a different way. 27 is positive, and even though when things are bad, I mean, many yipaleh kol davar. Is there anything that exceeds God's capacity to change? Right? That's a much more. That's not good. That's optimistic. That's positive. Right? I could say I once had $1,000 and I lost it all. So if I stop the story, I once had $1,000. That's true. But right now, knowing the rest of the story, that's not so happy. If someone then said, God can return that $1,000 in a second, right? Then, that sort of changes it. That's part one. I do also think So let me finish this point, the point I was making before your question, and then
Sure.
I'll come back to why actually this part is actually integral for us to include in Haftarah. It's interesting just to note that the rest of the chapter, which isn't part of Haftarah, does not frame these lines as positive. Lachen ko amar Hashem hinei notena kol ha'ir hazot biyad hakashdim. I'm putting this ubiyad Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel. I'm giving over the land to everyone, to the enemies, to Nebuchadnezzar, to the king of Bavel. And they're going to capture it and everything else, but you'll come back eventually. Meaning, this line of Hamimeni Yipaleh Kol Davar, which we read as just pure optimism. God can change the history at any moment. Yeah, but that's not what God's saying. God's saying is nothing can, and this is Yirmiyahu's real question. Meaning, you want to tell me God can redeem the people, right? God can choose. We're at a fork in the road. Either the city will be destroyed or it won't be destroyed, right? God could switch whichever track it is either way. Yirmiyahu's question is much more fundamental. Not, we're about to be destroyed. Yirmiyahu is saying is, God, you promised we will be destroyed. That is what's coming next. Yirmiyahu doesn't see that as an option not to happen. Yirmiyahu sees that the next step in Jewish history is destruction. If that's the case, how is it that we're going to come back? Meaning, you could read this as Yeshua Hashem, God could save us in any moment. There's a fork in the road, we could swing back and be saved from the Babylonians. But that's not what Yirmiyahu was imagining. Yirmiyahu was imagining that the next step is destruction. And what he doesn't understand is, how can there be, or what he's asking God is, how can there be such total destruction that you're describing, and yet this optimistic future afterwards, right? Our Haftarah manipulates his question to say, Yeshua Hashem Karavine, God's redemption can be in a moment. Is there anything that's outside the reach of God? Period. Exclamation point. Good. But the rest of the chapter is, yes, exile is going to come. Nebuchadnezzar is going to succeed. The temple is going to be destroyed. But there's a future for the people. That's a much more nuanced message. So it's just an interesting idea. I want to highlight, though, going back to this theme, what's the Haftarah about? What's Haftarah is about? So some people suggest the Haftarah is about hope. You have to have room to hope, even when there's a problem. But I think hope is this very amorphous thing. I think it's actually something different. Our Parsha is all about what themes? There's Geulah, there's redemption, but there's also Shemitah and Yovel, right? The sabbatical year and the Jubilee year. What is the primary question on the mind of the farmer during that time? How am I going to eat? And it's not an imaginary question. The Torah says that. If in our Parsha, right? Do you think, what are you going to do on the 7th year, in the 8th year, in the 50th year? You haven't planted, you haven't grown. How are you going to eat? The idea is to trust God, right? There's a pivot here to trust in God, in God's power. And that becomes part of Yirmiyahu's message. That is the answer to Yirmiyahu's question also. Yirmiyahu says, all right, I'm doing this whole demonstration. We're going to come back. I'm signing all these things. How can it be? You just told me, submit to Bavel, destruction is going to come, but we're still going to end up on the top at the end? And the answer is, trust in God. Right? God gives you instruction, you have to trust in God. Shemitah is about submitting to God. And Yirmiyahu's message is submit to Bavel. Ultimately, you'll be redeemed. God will protect you, right? So then the messages follow as well. And by the way, what's the answer? What's the ultimate answer to the Shemitah question, to the Yovel question, and to our question? Hamimeni Yipaleh Kol Davar. Is there anything beyond the ability of God to provide for? Right? And that's why it's so important that becomes the end of the Haftarah, because that is the message of the Haftarah. That's the message of the Parsha. Shemitah, Yovel is supposed to instill within us an appreciation that everything comes from God. Nothing is beyond God's ability to provide, even if we don't plant and plow and harvest and all the different things that go into the agricultural world for a year, for 2 years, right? And that becomes a big part of this piece. It's also, as I noted, fascinating to note some of the pieces here that go into buying the land, the witnesses, the signature, the signing, the deed. It's very similar to a business transaction that we have today. So let's just recap, and we'll then go to concluding thought. Our Haftarah number 1 is from Yirmiyahu 32, from this bright part of Yirmiyahu, which imagines the future, right? It's 2 parts. It's the scene of purchasing the land from his cousin and the whole elaborate process, the vast closing that goes with that, the signatures, the witnesses, the attesting, and then the burial of that. And then part 2 of the Haftarah is Yirmiyahu's prayer to God. God, you're telling me that everything is going bad. Why are you making me buy land? How can this be? And you're telling me the Jewish people deserve it. And I agree with you, the Jewish people deserve it. So how are you telling me that things are going to be okay? And our Haftarah ends with this idea that nothing's beyond God's power, right? Hope in God, trust in God, recognize that submitting to what God wants is the way forward. We saw Yirmiyahu is in this prison. What type of prison is it? It's not the Gulag, it's not Siberia, it's not Gitmo. It is a political prisoner. It is, you can't be going around, spreading the word of your subversive message, but clearly he still has access to lots of people. And then we talked just about the unique message of submitting to God, recognizing that ultimately it's in God's power. There are moments that Judaism calls on us to restrain our innate human desire to try to forward our position and deal with our issues. And even Jewish, normally we say hishtadlus, you have to put your best foot forward, you have to try your hardest, you have to put an effort in. Shemitah, Yovel is an example. We're not supposed to do that, right? It's countercultural. You're supposed to be passive in this moment. That's what Yirmiyahu was saying as well. Be passive in this moment. And that becomes part of the message of this story. And it's all embedded in this beautiful metaphor that is Geulah, redemption. The idea that your fellow, your family ultimately is on the hook to help you as a family, to support you. The Orach Chaim on our Parsha, or it might be on the Chukotai, I don't remember which one, has a beautiful piece when it talks about Geulah, it talks about redemption. It's referring, he says, it's obviously referring to a fellow and their relatives. But he says over and over again, we describe ourselves as the children of God. It's God's special nation, that God's name is called on us. Ultimately, then, who is our fellow when the Nachalah, when the inheritance of God is in exile, is in need of redeeming, right? We are God's inheritance. We say that all the time, right? Who's responsible then to redeem us? The Almighty, right? And that's an incredible message. The idea of Geulah being, looking at the Jewish people as God's adjacent property that needs to be redeemed, that even if we ourselves are not able to redeem it, the Torah commands us that God's will is that if your friend can't redeem his property, you have to help them. So if the Jewish people can't redeem themselves, says Orach Chaim, who is on the hook based on this Torah law to redeem the Jewish people? The Almighty. And that this becomes a huge redemptive piece that we look to God and we say, God, listen, we've been trying for 2,000 years. We're not making it. It's up to you now to redeem us, right? That's a very audacious, bold expression of hope and desire to the Almighty, which I think is also part of the countercultural narrative that is encapsulated or perhaps echoed in our Haftarah. We'll stop here. If anyone has any questions.
Perhaps going back to my question about ending in Pasuk 22 verses 27. Maybe this is better left to Rabbi Gopin, but do you have any idea why Chabad would end there and why the rest?
I'm sure it's not Chabad. I'm sure it's probably the Sephardic tradition.
Okay.
Because Chabad typically don't have their own customs around these things. It might have to do with there might be a Zohar or something about this. Looking right. I mean, there's definitely 23 and 24 talk about the destruction of the people and the badness of the people. There's always an aversion to including that in the Haftarah, so that could be part of it also. But it's not Chabad in particular. It's typically it has to do with either a broader set of Hasidus or Sfardim also.
Okay.
All righty. It's good to see everyone. Have a great day.
Okay, thank you.